Been looking at chapter 8 of our text, which deals with emotions. The first section dealt with what are emotions. The second one, influences on emotional expression. Third, expressing emotions effectively. And now fourth, we're looking at managing emotions. The previous section dealt with how to express your emotions constructively. But there are times in which you want to keep your feelings to yourself and not express them to others necessarily. And so this section looks at how to manage your emotions intrapersonally within yourself through your own thought processes. There are two types of emotions. There are those that are facilitative and those that are debilitative. Facilitative emotions contribute to you functioning well in a healthy manner in terms of your psyche. Debilitative emotions, on the other hand, prevent you from effectively functioning. So your performance is not well. Think about it this way: a certain amount of anger or irritation can be constructive if it motivates you to make a bad situation better. But when anger turns to rage, things usually don't turn out as well. So one difference then between facilitative and debilitative emotions is the intensity of the emotion. That's the first characteristic. The second characteristic of debilitative feelings is the fact that they last for a while. It's their extended duration. So feeling sad after a breakup of a relationship is okay, but spending the rest of your life grieving over that loss really accomplishes nothing. Staying angry at someone for wrong inflicted long ago and still keeping that grudge not only punishes the wrongdoer, but also punishes you, the grudge holder. Social scientists call this rumination, and that is recurrent thoughts not demanded by the immediate environment, something that's deep, far back in the past that continues in your thought processes. That's rumination. So remember that thoughts cause feelings. So how do you minimize debilitative feelings? One way is known as the rational emotive approach. It's based on the idea that the key to changing feelings is changing your thoughts, changing unproductive cognitive interpretations of events. So emotions might seem to have a life of their own, but very often that's not the case. There's usually something that triggers it. So when looking at emotions, many people believe that they have little or no control over the emotions, but that certainly is not the case. There's always a trigger. So the causal relationship between the trigger or the activating event and the emotional discomfort or pleasure isn't as great as it seems. So therapists argue that it's not the events necessarily, such as meeting strangers or being jilted by a lover, that cause people to feel poorly, but rather the beliefs they hold about these events, the way they interpret these events. So, people's interpretation of events determine their feeling. If you have been called a name, your thought might be, I've done something wrong, and you would get hurt or upset. But if you've been called a name and it's because your friend really is sick and they're not well, then the consequence here would be that you would exhibit pity or sympathy toward them. Okay, so it's how you interpret the event. But if someone said, I love you, it can certainly be interpreted in a variety of ways. It might be taken at face value as a genuine expression of somebody's feelings for you. But it also might be seen as an attempt at manipulation. It's your interpretation of the event. So the key then to understanding and changing feelings intrapersonally and within yourself lies in reappraising the event. This takes place through a form of intrapersonal within you communication that we call self-talk. So it's that internal monologue that's non-vocal, that is our process of thinking. Irrational thinking and debilitative emotions. The process of self-talk is essential to understanding the debilitative feelings that interfere with effective communication. So these debilitative feelings come from a number of irrational talks that's within our self-talk. We call them fallacies. They lead to illogical conclusions And of course, ultimately, they debilitate you. The fallacy of perfection is the first one. People who accept the fallacy of perfection believe that a worthwhile communicator should be able to handle any situation with complete confidence and skill. Of course, this is a high standard that nobody can fulfill. So they think admitting mistakes, saying like, I don't know, or sharing feelings of uncertainty or discomfort may be seen as a social defect, but that's not the case. We all do. None of us are perfect, right? The fallacy of approval is the second one. People who subscribe to this fallacy of approval go to great lengths to seek acceptance from others, even to the point of sacrificing their own principles and happiness. All right, you want others to like you, to approve of you and your behavior. So, abandoning the fallacy of approval doesn't mean living a life of selfishness. It's still important to consider the needs of others. The next fallacy is the fallacy of should. It's the inability to distinguish between what is and what should be. What is and what should be. And none of us, could you imagine somebody saying there should be no rain on weekends, money should grow on trees, and we should all be able to fly? Because these are all foolish beliefs. But we hold very similar ones when we say he shouldn't be so inconsiderate, she should stand up for herself, they should work harder. We hold expectations for ourselves and others. Some of the expectations we hold for ourselves include, I should be more outgoing, or I should be nicer to my family, or I should be a better team player. Even when they're true, these shoulds generate a lot of emotional baggage. Rather than expecting others to behave the way you think they should and feeling disappointed when they don't meet that standard, it's more realistic to think, I wish she or he would behave the way I want. Or maybe I'm being unrealistic to expect any better behavior. The fallacy of overgeneralization occurs when a person bases a belief on a limited amount of evidence. So you might say, I blanked during the speech, so I'm a terrible communicator. No. Some friend I am, I forgot my best friend's birthday. I'm the worst friend ever. Well, that's not the case. One event doesn't constitute you being a terrible communicator or being a terrible friend. A second category of overgeneralization occurs when we exaggerate shortcomings. He's always late. She never listens to me. He's always criticizing me. The fallacy of causation involves people who believe that they should do nothing. People who live their lives in accordance with the fallacy of causation believe that they should do nothing that can hurt or in any way inconvenience others because it will cause undesirable feelings. So, a reluctance to speak out in such a situation often results from assuming that one person can cause another's emotions. We may act in provocative ways, but each person certainly is responsible for the way he or she reacts. So you should take responsibility for your actions. No one else causes it necessarily. We should take responsibility. No one makes us angry necessarily. The fallacy of helplessness suggests that forces beyond our control determine satisfaction in life. And people who use this outlook constantly see themselves as victims. There's no way I can get ahead in this society. I was born with a shy personality. Changing your self-talk can certainly help you see some of the choices and feel more positive about pursuing them. The fallacy of catastrophic expectations operate on the assumption that if something can go bad, something bad can happen, it will happen, and it will happen to me. It's kind of Murphy's Law. If I invite them to the party, they probably won't want to come. If I speak up to resolve a conflict, things will probably get worse. If I apply for a job, I probably won't get hired. So once you start imagining terrible consequences, self-fulfilling prophecy can be set in motion. And when people who have a pessimism bias often perceive threats in their relationships that are not apparent to outsiders, that may not even be there. And certainly it does lead to relational dissatisfaction. So emotion management involves self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and reappraisal. So how do you minimize debilitative emotions? Well, one, monitor your emotional reactions. Recognize when you're having a debilitative emotion. How can you tell? Well, remember two things. One, they are too intense, and two, they last too long. So monitor your emotional reactions. Two, note the activating event. What triggered it? If you can figure that out, it certainly will help significantly. Sometimes it's not a single activating event, but rather a series of small incidents that pile up and build toward a critical mass and trigger this debilitative feeling. So track down activating events, notice the circumstances in which you have debilitative feelings, and sometimes it might be around specific people. Sometimes you might discover that being around certain types of individuals trigger debilitative emotions. Sometimes it's settings. Sometimes it's the topic of conversation. Record your self-talk. Record what you're telling yourself when that occurs. The link. This is the point at which you analyze the thoughts that are linked between the activating event and the feelings. And so what are you telling yourself? So if you want to get rid of debilitative emotions, it's important to actually write down your self-talk when first learning to use this method. Putting your thoughts on paper will help you see whether they make sense, whether they make any sense at all. Then dispute your irrational beliefs. Find out which of your internal statements are based on mistaken thinking. Decide whether each belief you recorded is rational or irrational. Explain why the belief does or does not make sense. If the belief is irrational, consider alternative ways of thinking that is more sensible and that can leave you feeling better. Change your self-talk. Replace words in your self-talk such as can't, have to, and should with words like will, want to, and choose to. Self-talk is most effective, researchers say, when it's stated in the second person. So address yourself as you instead of I. Coach yourself. Talk yourself out of feeling bad. How do you maximize facilitative emotions? Maximizing facilitative emotions certainly is the other part of the equation. Reducing debilitative emotions is one, maximizing facilitative emotions is the other. So if thoughts can cause feelings, then positive thoughts can cause positive feelings, and ruminating or thinking about the good rather than the bad in life can enhance one's emotions, one's relational, and even one's physical health. So cultivate what referred to by Susan David from Harvard as emotional agility. It's a set of skills that build on our ability to face our emotions, label them, understand them, and choose to move forward deliberately. So you can't dictate all the events of your life, but you have the power to reappraise them, to reinterpret them. You can regard challenging situations as growth opportunities. You can focus on what you've gained rather than what you lost. And you can choose compassion over contempt. That is Chapter 8.